Hello and welcome to episode 484 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Well, it's good to be back, Andy, because as I mentioned last week, I've done a bit of moonlighting this week. I was on another podcast, actually. I travelled into central London, all talking about pensions. So a lot of stuff to do with pensions, the last 10 years. I'll give more information on that episode in the near future when it's released. I think it's going to be released before Christmas. So it's good to be back on this show, Andy, which is obviously the best money show in the UK. But before I crack on and tell you what's going to be on the show this week, we're going to read out the reviews. So we've got a handful of reviews that we're going to read out, and these people actually are going to win a Money to the Masses mug. So if your review is read out by Andy or me, then do email in and claim your Money to the Masses mug. You just need to give us your address and we'll send a mug out to you. So Andy, if you start the review reading, and I'm going to finish on the final one because the final one's actually linking into what's going to be on the show this week.
Yeah, and so the first one is from Paul MOT, and Paul goes on to write, I've subscribed for years and I constantly pick up wise advice and insights with the current sections referring back to previous episodes. It's a great way of benchmarking your finances. While Damien is the guru, Andy is the man. Sorry, this is the first time I read this.
Come on, Andy, you are the man of the people, it says, reflecting what many of us think as we listen. So, Andy, there you go. Have you been described as a man of the people before?
No, that is the first time. And he finishes off with saying it's a great show for listening as me and my dog Pip do our daily walk. So I really should read these reviews before I bring them to the podcast.
That actually took you back a bit, didn't it? You were sort of stunned. So one thing I would say is if you're listening to the podcast this week, go on to, if it's via Spotify, go on to Spotify, leave a comment as to what you're doing. Because I'm always intrigued what people are doing when they listen to the podcast. So if you're walking the dog, cleaning the house, whatever you're doing, working maybe, leave a comment. I'm intrigued. Or you can go on to the YouTube version of the show. There's links in the description of the podcast. Just tell us what you're doing because we're always fascinated to hear that.
And the next one is from Dudders107. And Dudders says, I've been a long time listener and have learned so much from the team at Money to the Masses. I especially needed the recent show about pension savings and share this with all the younger people I know. I started my pension journey way too late, but thanks to Damien, I'm starting to feel I've got it in hand. I also love the Monday and Friday quizzes on Instagram. And by the way, the Pension Mirror aged me about 7 years older. But then he goes on to say, might just be a little bit hungover today. So there we go.
Yeah, so the trick there is I've worked out, is if you make the lighting a little bit better, turn a light on, that pension mirror actually reduced your age. So even if you are hungover, just turn the light on a bit, then you might be a little bit younger. He did mention in there about the Instagram quiz. So don't forget, every Monday we put out an Instagram quiz, which is based upon the topics we cover. So it's a good way, 5 multiple choice questions to test yourself on everything that's covered in the show of that particular week. It stays on Instagram till the next week. So you've got a whole week to do it. And actually, you can go and find the episode on the Money to the Masses website. So every episode of the podcast has a page on the Money to the Masses website where you can go and read a bit more about it, find the links we also talk about that are contained in the show notes. But the quiz itself remains on that particular page, and we also do a little bit of a summary on there. So the final review I'm going to read out actually links to what's going to be on this week's show. So this is from Lava Yuki. It says, I listened to a couple of different UK financial podcasts and Money to the Masses is the best for super practical and easy ways you can save money. I like all the episodes, especially about the different scams going about, but also things like ways to save on insurance, holidays, taking money abroad, bank accounts, etc. I always thought I knew a lot about money hacks, but clearly not. Money to the Masses is a real treasure trove of useful, practical advice. Would love to see more episodes covering scams too. Well, you're in for a treat this week because we're going to do something very different. So for new listeners, what we normally do is have 3 sections on the podcast covering different topics. And this week we're going to have one big section because we're going to be talking exclusively about scams. And that's partly because of the time of year. They're particularly prevalent as people are shopping, for example. But also it is Charity Fraud Awareness Week, it's BBC Scam Safe Week, and I think it's actually been International Fraud Awareness Week. So we're going to throw our voice into the mix. So we're going to be talking about scams on this week's show, different types of scams, giving you examples. So this is going to be one you want to listen to, but also share with people. And I feel that there are going to be a lot of people listening to the show who might be sitting around maybe the Christmas dinner table talking about, have you heard about this particular scam? The sort of things that you bring up. And it's particularly for people who are elderly as well. So even if you might know about some of these scams, some of them are going to be impacting people who are particularly vulnerable. So it's always going to be worth listening out for those people and mentioning it to them.
Yeah, so let's get started on the scam special then. And I thought what we'd do, Damien, is split it into three broad categories. And the first category we're going to cover is what's been hitting the news recently. It's Black Friday week as this podcast goes out. But of course, these types of scams don't just apply to Black Friday week. These are scams that you need to be aware of all year round. And so we're going to be covering online shopping scams and delivery scams to start with. Now, NatWest did a recent bit of marketing, really, and they produced what they called a scam vent calendar. So it's highlighting 12 of the most popular online shopping scams that are out there. And it's quite a clever piece of marketing. It's an advent calendar with chocolates inside, essentially. And each day you open up the door and you've got a different sort of scam that you need to be aware of. And why are you laughing?
Well, I just like the idea that they could have taken it a step further. And the idea of having a scam advent calendar, if there wasn't any chocolate in there, you bought a chocolate advent calendar and it taught you there was no chocolate in there and there was no scam advice. And in fact, it could have been just a scam itself. Anyway, sorry, Andy, I kind of interjected there. Sorry, carry on.
No, well, it's a clever piece of marketing. These advent calendars are available in certain branches. From the looks of it, they've all sold out already. I say sold out, they're not selling them. I mean, that really would be a scam if they were selling them in the bags. But they highlighted 12 of the most popular online shopping scams. And so what we've done is kind of looked at the top three, because the top three are ones you would have heard about, and we'll just go through them one by one. So the first most prevalent online scam at the moment are to do with phone sales and phone purchases. 26% of all online scams are to do with not just tech, but phones in particular. And what they've said here is scammers advertise high demand phones at attractive prices. And once the victim pays, they then receive ultimately a counterfeit or stolen phone, or a completely different item altogether, or in some cases, nothing at all. So when you think about online or shopping scams, you often think about the online retailers, but actually what NatWest are highlighting is a high percentage of these online scams that are happening are actually happening on social media sites, things like Facebook Marketplace.
So bear that in mind in terms of when you're buying online. Look at those marketplaces. They are, like Andy said, a place that's very prevalent for scams. Another popular scam relates to tickets. So this is next after phones. So we're thinking about things like concert or theatre tickets. So fraudsters are selling fake or non-existent tickets to events such as concerts, sports games, theatre shows. And victims either receive counterfeit tickets that are not accepted at the venue, or they don't get any tickets at all despite making a payment. So bear that in mind. And one thing, can I just say, learning from experience. So when I went to a Champions League final many years ago, Tottenham got to the Champions League final, people remember, and then unfortunately lost. I didn't do what lots of people were doing, posing with their ticket to say that they'd received one, because obviously people do that on social media. If they would get a ticket, let's say for an Oasis gig, by posing with their ticket online, they actually are exposing the details of that ticket for people who might want to make a counterfeit copy. So don't do that. Even if you're proud of it, it's slightly to the side of what I'm talking about, but it could mean that your valid ticket doesn't ultimately get accepted when you get to the gig, because somebody else might have had a version of that and gone in already.
And actually, I have heard recently of people watching events on TV, say like the snooker event is on at the moment, and often what happens is people in the production team and people on TV have credentials, and often they'll be pictured with the credentials around their neck and their badge on show. There have been instances where scammers or freeloaders really have zoomed in and taken pictures of those credentials and have actually managed to get into certain events. And often it's not for bad purposes. It's basically because they're just trying to gain a bit of attention. Sometimes they'll often want to get into the green room and get some free food.
Yeah, so you have to admire some of these people. Their ingenuity, they're sort of being innovative, but unfortunately, some people use those skills for bad purposes. So we're moving on to the next one, Andy, the third and final one from the Scam Vent calendar.
Yeah, so vouchers and gift cards. Now, fraudsters are selling fake or invalid gift cards at attractive prices. Again, the social media sites are prevalent for this. Essentially, what people are doing is they're purchasing the vouchers. They think that they've got the voucher. It all looks good. And it's almost like the perfect crime as well, because often people won't find out about the fact that those vouchers are invalid or completely fake for a good few weeks, because these are being purchased for gifts for other people. And so be super vigilant where you're buying these vouchers online, and especially on these social media marketplace sites. And Damien, there was something else that came to our attention this week.
Yeah, so there was a piece on, I think it was TV program, it was actually, did a segment on one of the scams that are happening with the vouchers that you can buy in supermarkets, for example. So we've all been into a supermarket and you've probably seen the racks of vouchers that you can purchase. So it could be anything, for example, something like another retailer. It could be a voucher for maybe it's Tesco itself, or it could be things like V-Bucks if people are into like gaming online, or Xbox, or whatever it might be. And what happens, you take the card off the shelf, there's no money on it, and then you take it to the till and they load it with the money that you give them. Say you give them £20 or put £20 on it, and then what will happen is you'll give that to a gift to somebody, maybe for Christmas. But what's been happening is some of those cards actually have a tear-off strip on the back of the packaging, which exposes the barcode and the number of that particular voucher. So fraudsters have been tampering with the back of the packaging, seeing what those codes are, maybe taking a photo of them or noting them down, and then they monitor those codes going forward. So they put the actual card back on the shelf, so somebody unsuspecting will take that card, put money on it. The fraudster is actually back at home checking on the relevant website to see when and if that number that they've taken, or the range of them they've got, has money put on it. And as soon as they see that it does, they then go and spend it. But of course, the person won't realise. They'll give it to somebody as a gift, and then that person will try and redeem that voucher at some point in the future, and then there'll be no money on it. And then they'll sort of, that confusion ensues. The warning is, make sure if you do use those vouchers on the supermarkets, wherever you might buy them, that come off the rack, that you check the back of them, that the packaging hasn't been tampered with and put back. So they haven't peeled it back and then placed it back down. Some of them will have those scratch off bits on them, so you to be able to see the actual details of the card, say the number, for example. But others don't. So the message is just be extra vigilant.
Yeah, and so just finishing off this piece where we're talking about online shopping, fraud and scams, Nationwide did a recent campaign to highlight what is called card not present fraud. And this is essentially where your card details have been taken without your authority and used online. Now, there's a few things you can do in order to keep yourself safe. We'll just run through a couple of tips and tricks. Now, I'm guilty of doing some of these, so it's certainly something you should be aware of. Always check your account regularly. Obviously, as we record this podcast, we're coming up to Christmas. We've all got lots of things going through our bank account. No doubt lots of us have got lots of Amazon purchases, and we wouldn't necessarily easily spot something out of the norm. So just be extra vigilant when you're checking your bank account and go through and make sure that they all match up with everything you'd expect. Another thing to be careful of is saving your card details online. Now, a lot of people have got Google wallets and Apple wallets, which are very secure indeed because they require biometrics to get into. But a lot of websites now are asking whether you wish to save your details onto their website. Now, again, they should have pretty good security measures in place, but it's up to you really to make sure that you feel safe in doing that. So if it's a website that you're visiting for the first time and possibly the only time, just question whether you really need to be saving those details online. If in doubt, keep your details safe. Don't save the details. It's only a few extra seconds for you to find your card and type them in, and then you know it's safe. Another thing to be careful of is exactly where you're making these purchases. Make sure that you're in a secure network. So make sure that you've got a VPN if you've got one. and make sure that it's on. If you're in a public place, maybe a coffee shop, and you're using their Wi-Fi, just be super careful, because there are lots of scammers out there and lots of ways for people to be able to scrape your details. Just make sure that you're safe and you're happy exactly where you're doing your shopping.
Yeah, so a general rule of thumb is don't buy anything on other people's Wi-Fi. So for the reason Andy's suggesting that people could use that, it could be monitoring the traffic and actually find out the details of your card. Of course, there's the slightly old-fashioned way of people scamming cards via cash point. So watching the PIN number that's input and actually reading the card details or capturing the card as well. So those methods are ways that people can capture details. But as Andy also mentioned, it's the weakest link in any chain of things that you do. So if it's a website where the security is pretty poor, or they are ultimately hacked later down the line where your card details are saved, that could be the way that people get hold of your card details. And one thing I want to point out is that anybody can become a victim of these types of fraud. It doesn't even matter if you're particularly vigilant. I've been a victim of it myself. I remember one time checking my account and seeing a purchase for mobile phones that was made somewhere, I can't remember exactly, I think somewhere like Nottingham, somewhere I hadn't been in years. And by spotting it, I was then able to contact the bank and have that cancelled and my money returned. So I would suggest that you use money management apps, so any budgeting app that are out there. So there's lots of them. There are free ones. There are things like Money Hub, which is a favourite of mine. There was a small subscription for that. There are things like Emma, again, subscription service. Snoop is another budgeting app which has a free plan. We'll put a link to the reviews, a roundup of the best budgeting apps out there that we've put on the Money to the Masses website. There'll be a link in the show notes. They are really useful for pulling in details of all your transactions, whether it be on different credit cards or bank accounts, so you can then check them off and see, is that something that I'm expecting? And as Andy mentioned, Amazon is one where you'll probably have lots of different Amazon purchases coming in, and if you share your finances with your partner, for example, you might not be aware of which is whose, and you need to double check, was that you that made that transaction? I know it's a little bit time consuming and a bit of a pain, but it's an easy way for people to put through transactions on your finances without you knowing, because lots of people are buying lots and lots of different things on Amazon. So do make sure you take the time to check. And the other thing is, I was once a victim, famously almost, I did a whole podcast on it, where somebody intercepted a card that was being delivered to my house. So when you get a new bank account card, that was intercepted, and they went on and actually took thousands of pounds of money. So I'll put a link to that show in the notes of this particular podcast, because it's worth listening to and the lessons that came from that.
Next, we're going to be moving on to delivery scams. Now, this links into the shopping because, of course, as you are ordering lots of stuff online, you're going to be getting lots of deliveries. Just to be super vigilant and careful of getting text messages from various different delivery companies. So these delivery and courier scams are essentially text messages that you will get from what seems to be legitimate delivery companies, people like DPD, Every. And because it's around Christmas time and you're expecting deliveries, potentially you could fall foul of these. What you need to look out for is links within these text messages, claims where the delivery's got stuck, or you need to release the delivery or pay a fee to get it released, or even just provide additional information. Maybe it's your name or your postcode for security purposes. So just be super careful. If you receive an unexpected message from a courier, think twice before you engage with that. Most of these courier messages that you will receive are for information purposes only. It might be a time slot or a window. Very rarely are you asked to actually interact with that and provide additional information. If you need to verify a delivery in any way, rather than clicking on any links within a text message, go back to the original seller through the original method. Say it was online through Amazon, go into your Amazon account, click on your delivery status, and there'll be details about the delivery in there. That is the best way to get back in touch with the online retailer and the courier as well.
And of course, you also get messages that are claiming that you've got maybe a parcel that hasn't been able to be delivered by Royal Mail, or a parcel that's on its way. You need to click through to a link to get it delivered at a point of time. So this time of year where you're having lots of parcels being delivered, if it's anything like my house, it seems to be every 5 minutes somebody's knocking on the door delivering something. You need to keep track of what you've got and what you haven't. Any messages like that, as Andy has said, don't interact with them. Work out what you've received already and what you've not received, And then if there's something that you think is missing, then contact that company directly. So make sure that you do just keep tabs on what you are getting and what you aren't. And before we move on to the next section, I just want to quickly mention QR codes again. We've done it on the podcast before, but there's quite a few scams going around where people tamper with QR codes. So they may cover over a legitimate QR code, let's say at a restaurant where they have a QR code on the table that you're meant to scan in order to pay. They'll put a sticker with a different QR code that actually takes you to a different website that may impersonate what you think is going to be the real website, and then you enter your card details and you'll become a victim of fraud. Parking machines, so when you go to a car park, there's been evidence of those being tampered with, cases where people have had their details stolen and therefore fallen victims of fraud. So QR codes, just be careful of them, make sure they've not been tampered with. And if there's any doubt whatsoever, just go directly to the website itself without using the QR code.
Okay, so we've covered a lot there in terms of online shopping and the types of fraud and scams you need to be aware of. We'll move on to this next section now, and we're going to be talking about impersonation scams. Now, these are essentially scams where you'll typically receive a call or an email from someone claiming to be from a trusted organisation. And so the first one we're going to cover off is the big one, banks and building societies. Obviously, that's where we get paid, it's where our savings are, it's where there's the biggest potential to become a fraud victim and become a serious victim of fraud. And so it's just a really quick reminder, once again, to people to be super careful about the phone calls they receive from what is purported to be your bank or building society. I'll be honest, Damien, I pretty much have a rule of thumb where I won't engage with the person if they call me. I'll take the phone call, I'll then hang up the phone, and I'll do a bit of a risk assessment in my own mind. I'll then log on to my internet banking, I'll look at maybe messages that the bank have sent me, and I'll make the decision then on whether I need to call them and act on it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good tip. My kind of rule of thumb is I never take calls from anybody I don't know. And the way the world works, trust me, if it's urgent, they'll leave a message. And then you can listen to that message and assess, who is that? And then you can try and work out if they're genuine. I never call back the number that they give me. If it's somebody claiming to be from my bank or building society that I use, then I will not use the number that they give me on the message. I would actually look at the back of the card that I have in my wallet and call that number, because that will ensure that I'm actually going through to the correct people. So if you stick to that rule of thumb, it will limit some of or most of the things that can go wrong in terms of giving over details to people. Always be wary when people are ringing you up asking for you to verify details before they can speak to you. I mean, when people do that to me, I end up almost always in this kind of loop with them where I refuse to do it, and then they say, well, they can't talk to me, and I'm saying, well, fine. Trust me, they will eventually communicate with you in a way that's appropriate, and you can call back your bank directly. Then you can have that conversation confident in the knowledge you're speaking to the right person.
And another good tip is, if at all possible, when calling the bank back, let's say you've had a call, you're a bit suspicious about it, and you've decided that you want to engage with them by calling them back, maybe use a different phone, because there are certain sophisticated tools that scammers can use where ultimately you think you've hung up the phone because they've called you. You then call them back on the same phone, but actually the line never disconnected. So you're just still on the line to that same scammer. So just be super careful about that.
Yeah, and that's something to be particularly aware of with landlines. I mean, with mobile phones, it's probably less of an issue, but I think it's a brilliant tip because they can just hang around, as Andy said, and you think you've called them back on a different number, but they're actually still the same person. So what's interesting is some of the new banks out there are actually trying to combat this. So Starling, for example, they enable their customers to check the status of any call. So if you get a call from them, or supposedly from them, you can open up the Starling app and check the call status banner to see if it is actually them who are calling you. And if it's not, it will say it's not, and then you should hang up. I should also mention that there is a service out there that is a 159. So if you dial 159 after you've received a call and you're not sure about it, it was a system that was set up so you could be put through to the correct number for your bank. So it was aimed at consumers to help them find the right number for their bank or building society. So if you're unsure, you could call that number and it'll end up at the correct customer service department for your bank or building society. Now, the only issue with that is not all the banks and building societies are signed up to it. But also going back to the point made earlier, if you have a scammer that's actually still on the line and impersonating the sort of the dial tone, as it were, they could still be there even if you ring that number and then still carry out the fraud because you think you've actually called 159 and you haven't, in fact. So it's not perfect. But as I said, I prefer to go find your bank card, look at the number on the back and ring that.
Okay, moving on to other types of impersonation scams. We're going to be looking at emails and texts specifically from HMRC. Now, just after Christmas, we move into the new year. And at the end of January, that's when self-assessment online returns need to be done by. And fraudsters are sending out text messages purporting to be from the tax office saying that tax refunds are due. You just need to fill in some details by clicking on a link. Also, they might be sending threatening messages about tax demands as well. So they work on both sides. They work on the greed and they work on the fear. Just be really careful about any kind of text messages that you receive. HMRC themselves have said that it will never leave voicemails threatening legal action. It will also never send you a text message saying you need to fill in details in order to claim a tax refund. And they've also said that if there's any refund due, which often there is, they wouldn't be sending out text messages asking people to click on links. You would do it in the usual ways. They may send you an email inviting you to log in the usual ways, and that will be through your government gateway ID.
And moving on to the last bit in this section, Andy, worryingly, you received a text message relating to the winter fuel payment. So there was a scam message going around related to that, because obviously now the eligibility criteria has changed.
Yeah, this was left a really bitter taste in my mouth, actually, because this is really targeting not just the old, but also the poor. Funny enough, my wife also received this similar text message from a different number within a couple of days of me receiving it. So I'll read it out. I've put actually a copy of that text message up on the screen so people can see it. I'm going to leave the phone number up there because I've got no qualms in actually highlighting what number it came from. It says, Winter Heating Subsidy Office Benefit Payment Notice. As the weather slowly turns colder recently, we'll begin to issue winter heating subsidies to reduce your heating costs. And because the Parliament decided to reduce the number of people receiving winter heating subsidy benefits this year, and you have obtained the qualification to apply, if you need to, you can apply through this link. Once the number of applicants is enough, we will stop issuing winter heating subsidy benefits. And then there's a link in there. Now, what you'll see from that is they are given a time frame. They're basically a bit like an offer. They're kind of saying you need to get in quick. So they're putting the pressure. Like any scams, it's about applying pressure for you to apply for it quickly. I don't like it. It's on screen. Be careful of it. And also, around Christmas time this year, you're going to be sitting down with other members of your family, potentially older members of your family. Just make them aware of this because it does look quite convincing.
So moving on to the final section of the podcast this week, we're looking at AI scams, so voice cloning and deep fakes. We touched upon this in recent weeks where we actually created a version of me, a voice that was actually created by AI, so they're very convincing. But Andy, you've got a bit of a game for me this week.
Yeah, so Which have created a Stamp Out Scams page, specifically looking at deep fakes. And there's a short quiz that you can take. You can look at a couple of videos that have been created and you can decide whether you think it is a deep fake or not. So I thought we could bring this to the podcast, Damien. We've got it up on screen now. We'll do it together. I've done it myself. I'll share my results at the end because I don't want to put you under pressure. But we'll press start on the quiz and see how you get on in terms of seeing if you can spot the deep fake.
Our newest platform, Quantum AI, will help people get richer fast. Instead of working for every penny, we make the money work for you. I promises that as long as Quantum AI stays up and running, people who use it will get wealthier. But the banks around the world are not happy with this new platform and are trying to shut it down.
So for anyone who's not watching the video version of this, there was a Elon Musk that was, it looks like he's doing a video call and he's talking about an opportunity here. And I mean, I think that's a deep fake. And my reasoning is that his voice doesn't seem to be moving. I don't think the sort of thing that Elon Musk would be involved with anyway. So I'm going to say deep fake.
Okay. We've selected deep fake and you are correct. That purported BBC broadcast was created by a scammer. And the tips on that one, again, you mentioned it yourself, Damien, is watch out for lip syncing, blurring in the video, or unnatural facial expression. So well done, you got that one right. Let's move on to the next
Yeah, I have
one.
an incredible investment opportunity for you. I've partnered with a top-tier cryptocurrency platform that the mainstream banks don't want you to know about. With my investment opportunity, people like you are doubling their money every 2 weeks.
Do you know what? Oh my God, I'm absolutely gobsmacked. That's Timmy. I mean, I know Timmy. So, I mean, I know there's no way he'd do that. It's a crypto scam. So, wow, I'm voting deepfake. So if anybody doesn't know, Timmy's Mr. Money Jar, as it says on screen. But I've been on talks with him, done live shows with Timmy talking about money with an audience. But I'm absolutely gobsmacked by that one. So I'm saying it's a deep fake because I've got inside information, but that is convincing.
You're absolutely right. It was a deep fake, and it is not something Timmy would do at all. It is fake. Mr. Moneyjar created this deep fake himself. So Timmy created it in partnership with Santander to highlight just how realistic those types of scams can be. Well done, Damien. Right, moving on to the next one.
Oh my gosh, if I was offered a chance to come back for any sort of a storyline, I'd bite that.
So on that one, that was Alex Kingston on her role in Doctor Who. It's whether she was being asked essentially by a journalist whether she would want to be involved again, and it was doing the rounds last year. Is that real or is it?
I mean, that's the most realistic of all the three of them, if I'm honest. I mean, the context of what she's talking about, I had no idea, and it's quite a short clip. So what I would say is I wouldn't have any qualms initially looking at that, thinking that wasn't real. It wasn't, I don't think, enough in there for me to say that it wasn't real. So for the spirit of this, I would say that was probably real.
So that was wrong. That one was a pretty convincing deepfake, and which highlighted that a video just like that you would possibly see online, and you would just skip through, you'd see it in your reels, and you'd just think that was her opinion on things. She never said that. She never created that. So it's just, again, to highlight how convincing these deepfakes can be. So I think this might be the next one, Damien.
Way that you can go about it. You could buy an excess reimbursement insurance from an online third-party provider, and you can do that before you go. So the cover is cheaper, it's better, and the difference is, though, if there is any damage, you will have to pay out to the car hire company, and then you'll claim it back from the insurer later.
I have to say, Andy, I think other than the sort of buffering and the sort of slightly, it made it look like there was something not quite right with the video in that respect. I think ignoring that, I would have probably not necessarily thought it was actually fake. I'm going for deep fake because of that element to it. I can't make a judgment based on what I see there. It wasn't enough to say that was definitely wrong or right. So I'm going to go for deep fake on that one. I've done 2 out of 4.
That one was actually very much real, and it was taken from the Get Answers podcast. But I think because they used a slightly different camera, and like you say, the buffering was a bit strange, probably because it was a lower grade camera. Sometimes don't be fooled by the fact that the quality isn't great. It might just be that the camera equipment or the audio equipment isn't as good as the top production. So it just almost highlights, doesn't it, just how difficult it is to spot the real versus the fake. Okay, so let's move on to the next one then.
So, how can we detect a deep fake? Look for blurring around the mouth. The person might blink less frequently than usual. If they are wearing glasses, the light reflections might not look right.
So for the listeners, this is Chris Ainsley, Head of Fraud Risk Management at Santander, and he's doing a video on how you can spot deepfake.
This is feels a bit like Inception. Are you asking me is this video on how to spot a deepfake real or not? It's kind of, is it a fake video about faking? Is that what you're telling me? I mean, this is getting to the point where we're just tossing a coin here. Is it real or not? I mean, he's made a, I think this is going to be a real video showing how this looks like a deep fake. So I think it's a deep fake, if that makes sense. This is an example of a deep fake video. So it is, in fact, a deep fake, but it was created. So it's a real version. See, this is what I mean. We've just done Inception here. So I'll go real, Andy. This will be 3 out of 5 if I get this.
Let's have a look then. You got it wrong, Damien. It is artificial intelligence. So it says here, you might not have guessed, but this is actually a deep fake created by Santander just to show how easily deepfakes can be made.
Yeah, see, I'm arguing with that. It's a real deep fake. Anyway, the point is that I didn't do particularly well. My skill set is not in working out deep fakes, real or not. Well, apart from if I know the people in them. But as that we've said on the podcast, I don't trust anything that you see online. I'm trying to teach my children this. You've got to just see any video online, assume that it is a fake of whatever it is. You can't take it as real. So I think that is a brilliant exercise, Andy. How many do you get again?
I got 3 out of the 6, so I got 60%. It's still not great.
Yeah,
but,
I'm not sure whether that's a real or fake answer to my question. I'm going fake. So that was brilliant. I think if people have seen that, will realise that anybody can fall foul of AI scams, and I have no doubt at some point in the future that we will probably be actually the subject of such things being online and talking about money.
So there we go. That is it. It's a scam special this week. And obviously, if you're worried about fraud and being a victim of fraud, we're just putting some details on screen for those watching it. We'll put a link to it in the show notes as well on where to get help if you have been scammed, details about Action Fraud, how to get in contact with them, and also the Citizens Advice Consumer Service. There is also a number on which you can forward text messages on in terms of reporting spam texts as well. And I've done that for the text that I received earlier about the heating subsidy. So Damien, that is pretty much it for this week.
Yep, so that's it. We're done as ever. Please do leave a review of the podcast. As those lucky people at the start of the show, you could receive a Money to the Masses mug. Do follow us on all our socials. There'll be various social posts that are put out on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube following this particular episode. So do keep an eye out for those. We do lots of content on those channels that doesn't come to the podcast, so make sure you do follow us, like what we do, comment, interact. It helps with all the algorithms and helps get Money to the Masses out to more and more people. And also don't forget to do the quiz on Instagram on Monday mornings, so you can test yourself on everything that we talked about on the show this week. As ever, also do join our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Money to the Masses. So Andy, I think all that's left for us to do is say until next time.
Until next time.